Hey guys, so in the last video I talked about the player controller I made for this game I'm working on, but in this video I want to actually talk about the game itself and what I've already gotten done so far. So again, if you just want to see, here is my third person player model that I'm not using yet, and here's the first person player model in Blender, and here's my player scene in Godot. So now, hopping into Godot, you can see my first person player controller in action. This is me looking down at my body. You can see the walking, sprint, jump. I can punch. I set my player speed to be really high so that I could just skate around this giant area. So it's pretty fun to just hop around and watch my shadow. I could sit here and do it for hours. I also can switch between items in my hotbar, and I can attack with it. If you're wondering why it kind of looks a little poopy, it's because I'm using the compatibility rendering backend. Right now I'm just working on a really laptop while I set up a PC, and the Vulkan drivers aren't supported on my hardware, so I'm not really worried about visuals anyway right now. So when I forgot to show you, I can crouch. This also leads me into the next thing I wanted to show you, which was my UI. You can see I have this hotbar that lets me switch between inventory items, and you can see I have a tiny dot for a reticle in the center of the screen. I'm just gonna hop into my other scene where I have items that I can pick up. Alright, and here you can see that interact ray I have on my player will change the reticle to this little hand icon when you are able to interact with an item, and when I right click I'm able to pick it up. It does the little collect animation and adds the rock to my hotbar. I gotta fix the collisions a little bit, but I can do the same with this stick. So since you already see that we have the item hotbar going, we're obviously gonna need to have an inventory system. And to do this, we need to have a class for items saved as a resource. So in my resource bin over here, where did I put it? I have an items folder, and I have 3 items so far: a stick, a rock, and this region flag, which you probably saw before, which I'll get into later. So if I go into the rock folder, I have the original rock mesh import, a script attached to the rock's scene, and this is for the item, the actual item that exists in the game world. So it is a rigid body 3D, so you're able to roll it around and stuff. And then what I also did in this scene was add an attach point 3D node placed right here, and this is where the hand phone will grab the rock, and so it'll show it in your hand. Here you can see I have a rock icon as a 64 by 64 pixel PNG image, and then I have this other script, rockitem.gd. Let's open that. So this is a script I made, essentially creating the rock item class. Each item is going to have an ID, a name, a world material, so the rock is made of stone. Item quantity is the amount of that item that you'll pick up when you interact with it. So for example, if I had it set to 20, it would be a good way to have it so, kind of like in Skyrim, if you pick up a quiver of arrows, it'll give you like a certain number of arrows. For picking up 1 rock, I want you to pick up 1 rock. Maximum stack, you can set this to whatever you want, 99. I had it set to 4 so I could test the hotbar and make sure it put items in the correct slots when you pick them up. This hand orientation is a little hack of mine. It's kind of sloppy, but I just wanted a quick, easy way to differentiate between items that will just be held normally like a rock, and then something like a stick, which will be held upright in the player's hand. That'll include weapons like swords, axes, like tools that you hold in your hand upright. Maybe this will make it so there's other ways to hold things, but right now if an item's hand orientation is upright, the player controller script will automatically orient the item in the player's hand correctly. And then we have the icon, of course. Another step I skipped was creating an item class. Right now I just felt like creating a different item for each individual item, if that makes sense. I don't know. And then from each of these item scripts, I would create a resource. And if you don't know how to do this, you can just right click, create new resource, and then look up the script that you have, but it must extend from resource, otherwise you won't show up in here. So let's look up stick item, and that will allow you to create a new resource for that item. So now if I click on the rigid body for the rock, at the bottom I still have this rock script, and if I click on that, let's see what we got. Now there's a little bit going on here, but the most important part is this part right here, where I give this rock item an attribute where I create a variable for the rock item resource, and then I create a variable for the data from that resource. And now the rock item data can be pulled anytime in the game where there is a rock. So now that we have items, we are able to make an inventory system a similar way. And to do that, I have another script called inventory, also extends from resource. I have a couple signals. I have a signal that gets called when the items in your inventory change, and then a signal that gets called when your inventory is full. This is the array that stores your items during the game loop. You start off with 0 items, so it is empty. And then there is a function in this inventory script called add item, which takes an argument, item data, and adds that item to your items. So then lastly, for the inventory system, I needed to have like a lookup table for all of the items in the game. So I created a script called world items that formats all the data for each item nicely, and then puts it neatly in this lookup list. And the reason I say I was being lazy was because then I just have it get the data somewhere here in this player controller script. When the player interacts with an item, it'll look it up in the world item script and add the item data to your inventory. That's a thing that can be done differently, the way it looks it up, but that's one of those things where I decided, let me just make it work right now by putting it in the player controller script. So